A holy stewardship, a precious opportunity, a divine calling, a parent. Parenting isn't just about babysitting and potty training. It's not just about teaching them to ride a bike or tie a shoe. It isn't just about making lunches and brushing teeth. Parenting is about changing the world. It's about reminding our kids who they really are, children of God, born for His glory. So parents, let's remember, the Bible tells us to train up a child in the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not depart from it. So show them the way. Pray for their soul and give them your best, because God gave you to them.
Well, there are indeed limitless philosophies on parenting. And certainly when it comes down to how to parent, everyone would have an opinion. But as sure as my name is Craig Lyle, I absolutely assure you that parenting, all parenting can be defined, it can be evaluated, and it can be deemed successful or unsuccessful based on one standard. And that standard is this: is the parenting biblically mature? Is it submitted to Christ's pleasure, or is it based more on a man-made philosophy? If parenting is not based on faith and it's not based on obedience to Christ and His scriptures, it's always wrong. And God gives us example of parenting. Look at last week. We're going to just real quickly go through these again, because they flow right into what we're going to cover today. Look at unhealthy cultural parenting. There are 3 common parenting practices that fail to apply God's standard, God's biblical teaching of parenting by means of unconditional relationship and conditional responsiveness. Look at these 3 unhealthy cultural parenting styles. The first one, all heart, no duty parenting. Consistent love and approval are high, but teaching respect and responsibility to God and others is neglected. This child knows they're loved, but they've been falsely allowed to believe that they can do no wrong. The earth revolves around them and their minds, and they are entitled to everything. Second, unhealthy cultural parenting style is the no heart, all duty parenting. Consistent focus is given to behavior and responsibility, but love and approval appear merit-based or uncertain. This parent disciplines, teaches the child's responsibility to others and to society and to God, but it's a goal-driven parenting. It doesn't offer consistent, emotional, unconditional love with the affection and acceptance and emotional ties, relational ties that come with it. And then the last one is by far the most dangerous and most unhealthy, the no heart, no duty parenting. Non-involvement with the child offers neither love and approval or instruction on how to love God and others. These parents live for self. These parents struggle to both receive love from God and give love to others. And these are parents who are unwilling to put out any effort or the time to teach, mentor, and instruct their kids. Notice we said last week what mature biblical parenting is. God consistently and perfectly administers an unconditional relationship and conditional responsiveness. Look what that looks like. It means God is all heart and all duty parenting. God offers steadfast loving kindness, another phrase often used throughout scriptures, translated literally, that is unconditional love. It's steadfast loving kindness based securely in His grace. But conditionally, you want to underline that, He responds to us based on our obedience or disobedience. Is the Christian loved? Oh yeah. Is the Christian going to get their way? Oh no. And so we saw last week that God firmly believes in discipline. He certainly does not show in scriptures what a lot of parenting teaches today, that we're to just appeal to people and to our kids and to present things to them apart from discipline. God shows the opposite of that. He definitely disciplines. Therefore, that leads into today's message. The goal of parenting. Christian parents are to be intentional in raising their children to love and live for Christ. In your outline, I'd encourage you to underline that phrase, love and live for Christ. The goal ultimately is not to teach your children to be nice. The goal ultimately is not to teach them obedience to laws, rules, and commands. The goal ultimately is not, as Dr. Phil likes to say, to prepare them to be productive members of society. Rather, as Christians, a Christian's parent's goal is to build within our children a life-changing relationship with Christ. The parents, therefore, are to be the overseers of your children. You're to be the shepherd of your children in the same way you have overseers and shepherds in the church. In your home, you are the overseer, the shepherd, teaching your children how to love Jesus and how to live for him. So look at the command. The scriptures instruct parents to raise their children in the training and instruction of the Lord. Look at Ephesians 6:4 on the screen. It says, "Fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Now, this applies to both parents, but because of the design of man and woman that's a little different, God, I think, appeals especially to the father here to be careful in this area. He needs to especially watch out, because this gives instruction on what not to do, what not to focus on, which men would be more prone to do, and what to focus on, which men are prone not to do as well. What do we not focus on? He says, do not stir up anger. That can be stirring up anger through unreasonable commands, focusing on the petty stuff. It can be angry outbursts. It can be impatience. It can be a number of things. The reminder there is children are not toughened individuals like fellow men are between each other. You cannot treat a child like you'd treat a man in the workplace. You don't treat a child like you'd treat a soldier. Children are tender. And that has to be reminded often. They view things very differently. A child's going to cry quickly and easily because they're very tender. Their skin hasn't thickened yet. So what we are to do is to train, which includes nurturing and discipling them. And we're to instruct our children. That word instruct literally carries the weight and the meaning of counseling your children continually, being a counselor to. So there's emotional connection, there's nurturing, there's loving. And do you see why he had especially encouraged fathers? We're more goal-driven. We, by nature, are more focused on the rules that we've established and the discipline and the carrying out of those rules. And he says you've got to be very careful to train them, nurture them in that training, instruct them, counsel them. And then look at Colossians 3:21. Fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they won't become discouraged. So notice Ephesians 6 and Colossians 3 remind us that alongside logic that tends to drive men, God commands us to pay strong attention to the hearts of our children. I increasingly am aware with men that this is a very neglected area. Men don't tend to focus on the emotional needs of a wife or children. They tend to focus on taking care of those needs, establishing leadership, setting direction, but not as much to the nurturing, emotional, relational needs there. And so to exasperate a child is a word. Exasperate literally means to anger them to the point of harboring resentment. It's a child who says, "What's the deal?" Or "Why try? You can't please them anyway." Or the child may begin to say, I can't stand my parents. Or I don't want to be around them. I don't want anything to do even with their ways and their God. For a child to begin to vocalize those things, you better quickly begin to say, am I exasperating them in the things that I am doing emotionally and nurturing and counseling-wise with them? So what's God's method to instruct and train? Look on the outline. To train. The method. The scriptures instruct parents to model, here's the key, to model how to love and live for the Lord for their children. I mean, underline that word, highlight that word model, put exclamation marks by that. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. To model is critical. It means a parent has a personal growing love relationship to the Lord that is very clearly evident and transparent in the way they think and the way they act. Look at Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 6. Listen, Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. In Deuteronomy, God has instituted the Passover, and each year as they ate the Passover, one of the questions children were to do in the middle of that Passover is to ask the parent what that means to them. And so this is the idea in the context of today, is that in church and in conversations after church and in the things we do, whether it's Lord's Supper or baptism or why we sing, why we go to church, all those things, what salvation means. It means to constantly be talking about the personal impact. One of the things we'd constantly say to our kids, well, you got to go to church, Dad, you're the pastor. And I'd say, if we weren't, we still would. We were before we were in ministry, and we will be after. The question you want to ask with this is, if your kids were not at all involved with the church and impacted by their teachers, their leaders, their ministers and such, what would your life be modeling to them about Jesus? Could they follow it and model you and have a strong model of living and loving Jesus? So it means that we seize and create those everyday opportunities to teach our children. In Deuteronomy, it's beautiful. God says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And he's saying that to the adults, but then look in verses 6 through 9. Let's read 6 again and then through 9. These words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. That's why they began to wear phylacteries, because they would put the scriptures of God right here and right here on their forearm to be close to the heart. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your city gates, and you can literally find those in Israel today. It involves helping your children to see everything in the world from God's perspective. And whether that's pleasing to him or not pleasing, whether that is receiving love from God and responding in love to God. Thus we see God's command and method, but we have a problem. Look at the second section in your outline. There's an obstacle in parenting. If it was that easy, we would all do well, wouldn't we? The problem is we fight this constant obstacle in parenting. Look what it is. For parenting to be effective, parents must address the sinfulness and depravity in their own hearts and in the life of each child. Key words this: we are sinful, we are depraved, and then if you want to underline those, our hearts are that way and our children's hearts are exactly the same. It's rather easy to note depravity in others. Have you ever caught that? It's rather easy to get into a mindset of modeling children or correcting children and the problems we see in them and lose sight of the problems we see in ourselves. It's easy for a lot of ministers to preach to a congregation and not apply to self. If you come up to me and say, "Oh, my land, you stepped on my toes," I will generally give the same answer every time. Good, because it stepped on mine all week. Good to have you with me. And that's what we're supposed to do, is acknowledge that in self and in others. That's huge. Because why? It's a condition from birth. Look at the next point in your outline. Every human is born with a very dark and fallen nature that seeks independence from God. Every human being, and yes, your precious child, has a dark, and sick heart. And they're going to carry that, and we're going to carry that until we're glorified in heaven. Any counseling you take your child to, which approaches them from a philosophy that they're inherently good unless such and such happens, whatever they say, is a totally flawed philosophy. It will not work. It's short-sighted. It is built around a human perspective. It's misdirected at its core. Even after salvation, have you noticed that once we get saved, we don't just clean everything up? And people will say, "Well, if you Christians are so saved, why do you do the things you do?" Because we still have an old nature, and it wages war with that new nature all the time, every day, every minute. And it's a battle that goes on within us from birth. Turn to Romans 3:10 through 18. Probably the key passage for you to remember anytime someone tries to tell you that humanity is good, unless those old bad churches get in there and mess them up and make them bitter or something, and Christians get in there and put all these standards on them. Well, let's look at the reality of human nature at its very core. Romans chapter 3, beginning verse 10. As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There's no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. All alike have become worthless. There's no one who does what is good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They deceive with their tongues. Viper's venom is under their lips. Their mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and wretchedness are in their paths. And the path of peace they have not known. There's no fear of God before their eyes. That is the exact description of what you and I are born in. That's why Romans 3:23, a few verses later, says, all have sinned. All fall short of the glory of God. That's the nature that precious little child you has down inside. Let's look at a few more verses. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is more deceitful than anything else and incurable. Who can understand it? Means naturally believing that we can live effectively and without God is the very nature of a deceitful heart. To think we have any ability to determine what is right and wrong. And isn't it interesting how humanity in their deceitful and broken and sick hearts are trying to replace God in every element of humanity in their lives. Proverbs 22:15, foolishness is bound to the heart of a youth. A rod of discipline will separate him from it. Foolishness is bound. That's a word that means it's tied. It's wrapped up in the heart of every child. It's observable in childhood, but it begins to parade itself in the teen years. We get a preview and practice stretch in the 2-year-olds. It doesn't go away. And that's why discipline is important, to try to address the foolishness that is naturally tied into every child's heart. Psalm 14, 1 through 3. The fool says in his heart there is no God. They are corrupt. They do vile deeds. There's no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the human race to see if there's one who's wise, one who seeks God. But all have turned away, all alike have become corrupt. There's no one who does good, not even one. Conviction and awareness of sin and surrender to the Savior is something that people stumble in without God. There is a lie that is lived in culture that people won't have to give an account to God. Through the years, more and more biblical and spiritual corruption take place. God says not one person on their own is good. Remember when the man came up to Jesus and said, "Good teacher." Jesus said, "Why do you call me good? There's none who's good but God." You know why he asked that, don't you? He was clearly proclaiming, "You call me a teacher, I am God. Can't call me." That's contradictory to say there's such thing as a good human teacher. I'm good because I'm God. Look at the impact on that. Sin and depravity progress is so key throughout life unless the individual discovers the emptiness and ruin of not turning to God in His way. That's why it's so important to begin that nurturing relationship and discipling and mentoring and counseling and teaching while children are younger and less hardened. It seems like, in my observation, and it's why I think children's ministry is absolutely critical in church today. Used to, you could win a junior or senior in high school when I was a youth minister, and you had a chance of reaching their family. The hardest family I remember in my youth ministry years would tell their kid, "You can get baptized, but I'm not coming." That's what the hard families say. Today, if you reach a youth, you've got very little chance of reaching their parents. They have progressed in their sin so far, it's hard to reach them. You might, but it's not common like it was when I was a youth minister. And the child today, or let's say the junior or senior in high school, our hardened parents today say, "You're absolutely not going to be baptized with," quote, "those people." And it's not a matter of just being passive. It's a matter of complete rejection of that. And so children's ministry is so important because to reach families today, you probably are going to have to reach them in children. And if you'll notice, more children, I think, are being saved today because I think the end is getting near. And I think God is moving down and you're having to reach them at a younger age than ever before because of the progression of what sin does. Look at the downward progression in these other verses. Proverbs 16:25. There's a way that seems right to a person, but its end is the way to death. Proverbs 19:3. A person's own foolishness leads him astray, yet his heart rages against the Lord. As our society grows more and more godless, more and more defiant toward the things of God, and experiences the consequences of that sin and that depravity in culture, instead of softening, people become even more enraged against God. The guns kill the children, not the homes without God ever mentioned, not the homes that are showing neither love nor responsibility toward people. It is God who's keeping people from being able to be however they feel and on and on. And God kills everyone, even if it's a drunk driver who by his act of drunkenness takes the life of another person. People rage against God and say, "How could a good God let my child, my loved one, be taken?" It has nothing to do with God. It has to do with the depravity and the fall of man. God just allows it to take its course. And so we see a world increasingly raging against the Lord. Proverbs 12:15, look at that one. A fool's way is right in his own eyes, but whoever listens to counsel is wise. To what counsel? To God, to His word, to righteous and God-fearing advisors. Look at the next one, Luke 12:13 through 21, the parable of the rich fool. The farmer apart from any acknowledgement of God or relationship with God, admires all his accomplishments. He pulled his boots up by his own bootstraps, and he's a self-made man, and he admires that. He's going to build bigger barns for himself. His drive and his vision would be admired in our culture today. But in verse 20 and 21 of that passage, God declares him a fool. He says, that very night your life is demanded of you, and his worth and his accumulations will be judged and forfeited. Jim Elliot, the missionary who was killed by the Amazon tribe, has this famous saying. You've heard it, I'm sure, but it's worth hearing over and over. He is no fool to give up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. By the way, if you want to watch that, The End of the Spear, it's on movie. You can watch the story of Jim and Elliot Elizabeth. Jim and Elizabeth Elliot. The solution to that: parents must face their own personal sinful natures while gently directing their children to face their condition as well. As adults, we must live in the knowledge of our incurable sickness and the foolishness of our old nature. And we had to invite the Lord daily to reveal our sin. That's why it's very important with kids. Some of the most powerful things you can do with kids is to confess your sin, to ask them to forgive you when you mess up, when you blow it. And so we need to be evaluating and fearing God and developing and accepting his righteous discipline and judgment and asking forgiveness and adjusting to him. That's the healthiest attitude that a child can have toward their parent. As the parent is assured of the love of God, that it's unconditional, nothing can change it, and then the parent becomes assured that his response is very conditional based on our obedience or disobedience, that is the model that is set for a child too. They begin to understand the assurance of love, involvement, and acceptance from their parents, but they also get a heavy dose of respect in the sense that they're not allowed to be foolish, unbiblical, ungodly. It's checked, and it is justly dealt with each time. Psalm 139, 23 and 24. Search me, God, know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. See if there is any offensive way in me. Lead me in the everlasting way. Are you and I aware of our sin apart from God? No. Once we begin to kind of master this external, outside appearance of righteousness, once we learn how to get people to think we're pretty righteous, it gets a little harder, because we can do that just based on saying things and being righteous and looking righteous and dressing righteous and acting righteous. But to understand the depravity of our heart takes God to dig it out little by little throughout lifetime. And that's why we should be on a path of doing well, and then all of a sudden God reveals another area of sickness in our life, and it brings us to a place of wrestling and saying, I need to give this to you, and I didn't realize I was so depraved in this area, but I am. Either something I'm doing or something I failed to do, and so I've got to dip down and deal with that, and then with that comes the joy of the Lord and his assurance of love in those things. Proverbs 9, 10 through 12. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your day will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you're wise for your own benefit. If you mock, you alone bear the consequences. The beginning or prerequisite to personal knowledge, or the beginning or prerequisite to wisdom, long life, rewards, is an awe and reverence and responsiveness to God. Proverbs 23, 13 and 14. Don't withhold discipline from a youth. If you punish him with a rod, he will not die. Punish him with a rod, and you'll rescue his life from Sheol. Sheol here literally refers in this context to a place of destruction and punishment. Biblically and properly applied, this verse says you literally can even save your child from eternal judgment through your commitment. That eternal judgment certainly symbolized by Sheol here, by a commitment to discipline them properly. Learning through human discipline results in learning to fear the discipline of God, and it can lead to salvation. Now listen, corporal punishment, let me make this very clear. Corporal punishment between you and your child has to always be administered out of love. Not out of dominance, not out of control, not out of anger, but out of love. Many times when I was headed back to the room to administer discipline to Micaiah, I was grinning because I could hear him back there talking to himself. And I was not angry. I was not trying to get even with him. I was not trying to hurt him. I was smiling and trying to get that off my face before I walked in and said, you had it coming. Oh, Dad, I hadn't done that much. Well, you've been working toward it for 3 days with this attitude, the lack of love towards your mother, the lack of respect toward her, on and on and on. And God loves us that way too. He doesn't do it because he's angry and he's lashing out. Discipline should not be done emotionally. It should be done spiritually with a goal in mind of what it's about and an instant follow-up of the discipline with love and approval and affirmation. Proverbs 29:15, a rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a youth left to himself is a disgrace to his mother. Ever seen a youth who grew up and disgraced his mother? She said, why didn't I correct him? Why didn't I deal with that when I saw it coming? The rod refers to an instrument of correction. It's a form, the rod here is a form of using two words to express an idea. Like we might say the two words nice and warm that fit together. And here, a rod of correction, rod and correction are two words meaning the same thing. A child left unpunished to himself will bring shame. And finally, Proverbs 19:18, our last verse. Discipline your son while there's hope. Don't set your heart on being the cause of his death. Put that together. Now let that sink in our Christian culture that doesn't like to discipline. Discipline rather than setting our heart on being the cause of his death. Tough passages. The bottom line is to decide if we're going to love unconditionally the way God's called us to and the way he does us. And then if we're going to apply conditionally, like a righteous judge would, the right determination. You have picked up these judges in certain cities who've decided they're not going to send anybody to jail. Oh, you've killed 4 people? Well, I'm going to put you on probation. What do? They go out and they kill again and again and again. Those cities led by those kind of liberal politicians are destroying themselves. Philadelphia and New York, San Francisco, California, those places are applying that no discipline. We believe people are inherently good. Just give them the drugs they need and give them the money they'd like to have, and they'll just all be sweet and happy. Terrorists will be sweet if we'll just be sweet to them first. It's not human nature, and it's not with our children. Would you bow your eyes, bow your heads, close your eyes? Take a moment to pray. And as music plays this morning, ask God how to adjust. If you need to speak to someone, our leaders will be on each side. Don't hesitate. There's nothing you're going to miss. Get straight up and go out to the sides. They can pray with you, pray for you. They can talk to you. But take a few moments in this time and apply and listen to what God is saying to you. Heavenly Father, you are beautiful. Help us to seek your way. Give us strength in parenting. Our parenting in many ways reflects our relationship to you. And if we are under conviction today of some of these areas, help us to strengthen ourselves in the Lord. Your forgiveness is always available. Restoration is always offered. You are the beautiful father to the prodigal son or daughter. Father, you know how wayward we are. But help us to not let ourselves say we love you and continue in that or the support of it in any way. So use this time today, strengthen us in you, and we'll give the glory to you in Jesus' name.